26-year-old Audrey Green stared at the toxicology report in her trembling hands, the hospital's fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the damning evidence. The numbers didn't lie, even when her family had spent 3 months convincing her they did. Her younger brother Mason hadn't accidentally overdosed on his anxiety medication. He'd been systematically poisoned, and somehow everyone she trusted most had known all along. The paper crinkled as her grip tightened, tears blurring the clinical terminology that would change everything she thought she knew about her family. In that sterile hospital corridor in Portland, Oregon, Audrey realized her fight for the truth was just beginning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Audrey Green had always been the responsible one. While her younger brother Mason explored his artistic dreams and their older sister Claire built her real estate empire, Audrey worked double shifts as a pediatric nurse at Sacred Heart Medical Center, sending money home to help with Mason's college expenses and their parents' mounting medical bills. At 26, she'd sacrificed her own ambitions countless times for her family, a pattern that had defined her entire adult life. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. Audrey was restocking supplies in the children's ward when her phone buzzed with their mother's number. "Audrey, honey, you need to come home right away." Patricia Green's voice carried an unusual tremor that made Audrey's stomach drop. "It's Mason. He's in the hospital." The 40-minute drive from Portland to their hometown of Hillsborough felt like hours. Audrey's mind raced through possibilities. Car accident? Sports injury? Maybe another one of Mason's reckless adventures gone wrong. At 22, her brother had a talent for finding trouble, but he'd always bounced back with that infectious grin that melted her mother's heart every time. Nothing could have prepared her for what she found at Hillsborough Medical Center. Mason lay unconscious in the ICU, his usually vibrant complexion a sickly gray. Machines beeped rhythmically around him, monitoring vital signs that painted a grim picture. Their parents, Patricia and Robert Green, huddled together in the corner, whispering in hushed tones that stopped abruptly when Audrey entered. "What happened?" Audrey demanded, her nursing training kicking in as she scanned the monitors and IV lines. Her father, a retired construction foreman with calloused hands and tired eyes, cleared his throat. "The doctors think they're saying it might have been intentional, that he took too many of his anxiety pills." Audrey's world tilted. Mason had been prescribed lorazepam for panic attacks that started during his sophomore year at Portland State University, but he'd always been careful with medication. Too careful, if anything, often skipping doses when he felt better. "That doesn't make sense," Audrey said, moving closer to examine Mason's chart. "His prescription was only for 0.5 milligrams as needed. How much did he supposedly take?" Her mother stepped forward, mascara smudged beneath red-rimmed eyes. Patricia had aged dramatically over the past year, stress from Robert's recent heart attack etching new lines across her face. "The doctors found a lot in his system, Audrey. More than anyone could take by accident." Dr. Amanda Chen, the attending physician, entered the room with the measured pace of someone bearing difficult news. Audrey recognized the expression. She'd worn it herself when delivering heartbreaking diagnoses to families. "Ms. Green, I presume you're Mason's sister." Dr. Chen's voice carried professional compassion tinged with concern. "I understand you work in healthcare." "Pediatric nursing at Sacred Heart," Audrey confirmed. "What's his status?" "We're managing his symptoms, but I'll be direct. The amount of benzodiazepine in his system suggests a deliberate overdose. We're required to involve psychiatric services and, given the circumstances, law enforcement will want to speak with the family." The room fell silent except for the mechanical sounds of Mason's life support. Audrey watched her parents exchange a look that made her skin crawl. Something passed between them that she couldn't interpret, a shared knowledge that excluded her. "Has he been depressed lately?" Dr. Chen continued. "Any financial troubles, relationship issues, academic pressure?" Before Audrey could respond, her father spoke up. "Mason's been struggling with school. Art major, not exactly practical. He's been talking about dropping out, said he felt like a burden on the family." Audrey stared at her father in shock. Mason had never expressed anything close to suicidal ideation to her. If anything, he'd been excited about his upcoming senior art exhibition, constantly texting her photos of his latest sculptures and paintings. "Dad, when did he tell you that? He seemed fine when I talked to him last week." Robert's jaw tightened. A tell she knew since childhood meant he was uncomfortable. "People hide things, Audrey. You know that better than most, working with sick kids. Sometimes families are the last to know." Over the next several days, Audrey practically lived at the hospital. She watched Mason's slow improvement, relief flooding through her each time his eyes focused a little more clearly, each time he squeezed her hand with increasing strength. But something felt fundamentally wrong about the entire situation. Mason's memories of the incident were fragmented at best. He remembered feeling dizzy during dinner at their parents' house, then waking up in the hospital 3 days later. When pressed on his mental state, he looked genuinely confused by suggestions he'd been suicidal.
"I don't understand why everyone keeps asking if I wanted to hurt myself," he whispered to Audrey during one of their private moments. "I was excited about my exhibition. Professor Martinez said my portfolio was graduate school material." The inconsistencies multiplied. Mason's apartment showed no signs of the depression and despair that supposedly drove him to attempt suicide. His art supplies were organized and cared for. His latest canvases revealed increasingly sophisticated technique and vibrant themes of hope and renewal. His journal, which Audrey read with his permission, contained entries about future plans, career aspirations, and excitement about potentially showing his work in local galleries. Most disturbing was the medication itself. Mason's prescription bottle contained the correct number of pills for someone taking the medication as needed over the past month. If he'd overdosed using his own prescription, the bottle should have been nearly empty. Instead, it appeared he'd barely touched his supply. During family meetings with Dr. Chen and the psychiatric team, Audrey found herself increasingly isolated in her doubts. Her parents painted a picture of a troubled young man hiding his despair, while her sister, Claire, who'd flown in from her successful real estate business in Seattle, supported their narrative with authority that made Audrey question her own observations. "Audrey, honey, you want to see the best in Mason," Claire said after one particularly tense meeting. "But you don't live here anymore. You don't see how much he's been struggling since Dad's heart attack and Mom's arthritis got worse. He feels responsible for the family's financial problems." Even Mason seemed to accept their version of events, though Audrey suspected the trauma and medication were affecting his judgment. When the psychiatric team recommended intensive therapy and careful monitoring, he agreed with the defeated compliance of someone who'd lost faith in his own perceptions. The breaking point came during Mason's discharge meeting. Dr. Chen reviewed the case file one final time, emphasizing the importance of medication security and family support. As she closed the folder, a detail caught Audrey's attention. "Dr. Chen, the toxicology report, it mentions the specific compound found in Mason's system. Was it consistent with his prescription?" The doctor paused, consulting her notes. "Actually, that's interesting. The benzodiazepine was lorazepam, as expected, but the blood work also showed traces of diazepam, Valium. That wasn't part of his prescription." Audrey's blood ran cold. Could there be a testing error? "Unlikely. We ran the tests twice to be certain. Sometimes patients mix medications or obtain pills from other sources. Did Mason have access to any other benzodiazepines?" The room fell silent. Audrey looked at her family members, searching their faces for answers. Her mother's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her purse. Her father's jaw worked soundlessly. Claire studied her phone with suddenly intense concentration. "No," Audrey said slowly. Mason doesn't have access to Valium. None of us do. Dr. Chen made additional notes. Well, these things happen. Perhaps a friend shared medication or there was some confusion. The important thing is that Mason is recovering and committed to getting help. But Audrey couldn't let it go. As her family prepared to take Mason home, she excused herself and approached the lab technician who'd processed the blood work. I'm Mason Green's sister, and I'm a nurse at Sacred Heart. Could you clarify something about the toxicology results? The technician, a middle-aged man with thick glasses, pulled up the file. Sure, what's your question? The diazepine levels, were they consistent with someone who'd been taking it regularly, or was it a one-time dose? He studied the screen carefully. Based on the concentration and the lack of metabolites that would indicate regular use, I'd say this was administered within hours of the blood draw, probably mixed with the lorazepam overdose. Audrey's world shifted. Someone had given Mason Valium, and it wasn't prescribed, wasn't something he'd taken regularly, and wasn't something he'd obtained himself. The timing suggested it had been administered deliberately, possibly to enhance the effects of the lorazepam overdose. Her hands shook as she thanked the technician and rejoined her family. Mason looked fragile and confused, leaning heavily on his father's arm. Patricia fussed over him with the intensity of a mother nearly losing a child, adjusting his jacket and smoothing his hair with trembling fingers. "Ready to go home, sweetheart?" Claire asked, sliding a protective arm around Mason's shoulders. As they walked toward the parking garage, Audrey studied each family member with new eyes. Someone in this group knew more than they were saying. Someone had access to diazepine and had used it to harm Mason, and somehow they'd convinced everyone, including Mason, that it was a suicide attempt. The realization hit her with devastating clarity. Her family wasn't just covering up Mason's poisoning, they were actively participating in it. Standing in that hospital parking garage, watching her family load Mason into their father's truck with performances of concern and relief, Audrey understood that everything she thought she knew about the people she loved most was a lie. The fight ahead wouldn't just be about uncovering the truth. It would be about surviving the discovery of what her own family was capable of doing to protect their secrets. Audrey caught her eye through the truck's rear view as they drove away, and for just a moment, she saw a flicker of the confusion and fear he'd been hiding behind his compliance with their narrative. He didn't believe he'd tried to kill himself either, but unlike Audrey, he was trapped in a house with people who had already tried to kill him once. The stakes had never been higher, and Audrey was completely alone.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The week following Mason's discharge from the hospital felt like living in an alternate reality. Audrey returned to her shifts at Sacred Heart Medical Center, but concentration proved impossible. Every time she drew blood for pediatric patients, she thought about the unexplained diazepam in Mason's system. Every family conference about a child's treatment plan reminded her of how smoothly her own family had constructed their false narrative. Her apartment in Portland's Pearl District, once a sanctuary from family drama, now felt like a prison of doubt. The exposed brick walls and industrial fixtures that had once represented her independence now seemed to mock her isolation. She'd built this life, this career, this identity separate from the Green family dynamics, only to discover that escape had been an illusion. Mason was staying at their parents' house in Hillsborough for recovery and monitoring, according to Claire's carefully orchestrated family text updates. The messages arrived with clockwork precision. Mason had a good breakfast. Mason worked on a small sketch today. Mason seems more stable. Each update felt calculated, designed to discourage Audrey from making unexpected visits. But Audrey knew her brother. She'd practically raised him during their teenage years when their parents worked multiple jobs to keep their household afloat. Mason didn't sketch when he was depressed. He painted with aggressive dark strokes or sculpted with brutal intensity. Sketching was his meditation, what he did when he felt hopeful and centered.
The inconsistencies gnawed at her until she couldn't stand it anymore. On Thursday evening, she drove to Hillsborough without warning, using her key to enter through the side door she'd used countless times during her youth. The house felt different. The warm chaos of her childhood, art supplies scattered on tables, Patricia's romance novels stacked beside Robert's woodworking magazines, the comfortable disorder of a lived-in family home had been replaced by an almost sterile organization. Everything seemed positioned for inspection, as if the house itself was participating in the deception. She found Mason in the converted garage that served as his art studio, but he wasn't creating anything. Instead, he sat motionless on a stool, staring at a blank canvas with the hollow expression of someone whose spirit had been systematically crushed. "Mason," Audrey approached carefully, noting how he startled at her voice. "How are you really doing?" Her brother looked around nervously before speaking, as if checking for surveillance. I'm trying to remember things, Audrey, but every time I think I'm getting somewhere, Mom gives me another anxiety pill, or Dad suggests I should rest more." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "What kind of pills is Mom giving you?" "The same ones from before," she says, "the lorazepam for anxiety. But they make me feel so foggy, and I never needed them this often before." Mason's voice dropped to a whisper. "Sometimes I find extra pills in my food, like they're trying to keep me sedated." Audrey's nursing instincts screamed danger signals. Post-overdose patients required careful medication management, not increased sedation. "Mason, do you remember what happened the night you ended up in the hospital?" "That's what's driving me crazy. I remember having dinner here. Mom made her famous pot roast, the one she only makes for special occasions, but I can't remember why it was special. Then I remember feeling really dizzy and nauseous, but not sad, not suicidal, definitely not suicidal." "What's the last clear thing you remember before waking up in the hospital?" Mason closed his eyes, concentrating. "Dad helping me to the couch. He seemed really worried, but also angry, and Mom was on the phone with someone, but she hung up real quick when she saw I was listening. Then everything gets fuzzy until the hospital." Audrey felt cold dread spreading through her chest. "Mason, I need to ask you something important. Have you ever taken Valium, or has anyone in the family ever had a prescription for diazepam?" "No, never. Why?" Before Audrey could answer, Patricia's voice called from the kitchen. "Mason, honey, time for your evening medication." The siblings locked eyes, and Audrey saw her own fear reflected in Mason's expression. "Don't take it," she whispered urgently. "Tell her you already took it, or that you're feeling good today and want to skip it." Mason nodded, but his hands shook as footsteps approached the garage. Patricia appeared in the doorway carrying a small paper cup with pills and a glass of water. At 58, their mother had always been the family's emotional center, quick with hugs and comfort food. But now Audrey noticed details that had escaped her before. The way Patricia's eyes didn't meet Mason's when offering medication, the slight tremor in her voice when discussing his recovery. "Oh, Audrey, I didn't know you were coming by. Mason was just about to take his evening medication."
"Actually, Mom, I'm feeling pretty good today," Mason said, the words coming out stronger than Audrey expected. "Maybe I don't need them tonight?" Patricia's face shifted through micro-expressions, surprise, concern, then something harder that Audrey had never seen before. "Sweetheart, Dr. Chen was very clear about maintaining consistent medication levels. We can't risk another episode." "What kind of episode?" Audrey interjected. "Mason seems lucid and stable. As a healthcare professional, I'd say reducing unnecessary medication is actually advisable at this point in his recovery." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia turned to face Audrey fully, and for a moment her maternal mask slipped entirely. "Audrey, darling, you work with children. Adult psychiatric care is quite different. I think we should trust the professionals who've been treating Mason." But Audrey had caught something crucial. Patricia had referred to professionals, plural, when only Dr. Chen had been involved in Mason's hospital care. "What other professionals? Has Mason been seeing someone else?"
Patricia's face flushed. I meant Dr. Chen and the psychiatric team, of course. Mom, Mason's voice carried new strength. I want to try going without the pills tonight. Audrey's right. I do feel more stable. The standoff lasted several heartbeats. Finally, Patricia set down the pill cup with forced brightness. Of course, sweetheart. I'm just worried about you. We all are. As their mother retreated to the house, Audrey quickly examined the pills she'd left behind. They looked different from the lorazepam Mason had been prescribed originally. Different shape, different manufacturer markings. Mason, do these look like your original anxiety medication? He studied them carefully. No, these are bigger and they have different numbers stamped on them. Audrey used her phone to research the pill identification numbers. Her heart sank as the results appeared. Diazepam, 10 milligrams. Valium. The same drug that had appeared unexpectedly in Mason's toxicology report. They're giving you Valium, she whispered. They're calling it your anxiety medication, but they're actually giving you Valium. Mason stared at the pills with growing horror. But why? Why would they lie about what medication I'm taking? Before Audrey could answer, Robert's voice boomed from the house. Patricia, where did you put those insurance papers Dr. Martinez needed? Audrey froze. Mason, who is Dr. Martinez? You mentioned that name before, something about graduate school? Professor Martinez teaches advanced sculpture, but Dad just said something about insurance papers for a Dr. Martinez. The pieces of a larger puzzle began forming in Audrey's mind. A doctor they'd never mentioned, insurance involvement, systematic medication deception, and a family narrative that didn't match medical evidence. This wasn't just about covering up Mason's poisoning, it was about something much bigger and more sinister. We need to leave, Audrey said urgently, right now. Pack whatever you absolutely need, but quietly. I can't just leave. Where would I go? And what if I really am mentally unstable? What if they're right, and I can't trust my own judgment? Audrey grabbed her brother's shoulders, forcing him to meet her eyes. Mason, listen to me. Mentally unstable people don't create the kind of art you've been making. They don't get excited about graduate school applications, and they definitely don't have family members secretly switching their medication and lying about it. The sound of approaching footsteps made them both freeze. Claire's voice carried from the kitchen, apparently having arrived while they were talking. Mom, is Audrey here? Her car's outside, but I thought we agreed family visits should be coordinated to avoid overwhelming Mason. They'd been planning this, coordinating visits, controlling information, managing Mason's recovery like a carefully orchestrated performance. Audrey realized with growing alarm that her unexpected arrival had disrupted their script. Mason, I need you to trust me, she whispered. Something is very wrong here, and we need to figure out what it is before they give you any more medication. Her brother nodded, fear and determination warring in his expression. Okay, but Audrey, if they're willing to poison me once and lie about it, what else are they willing to do to keep their secret? The question hung in the air between them, as footsteps approached the garage. Whatever dark truth her family was hiding, Audrey was about to discover just how far they'd go to protect it, and how dangerous it would be for anyone who tried to expose them. Claire appeared in the doorway with Patricia close behind, their expressions carefully composed, but their eyes sharp with calculation. Well, this is a nice surprise, Claire said with practiced warmth that didn't reach her voice. We were just talking about how Mason might benefit from fewer surprise visits during his recovery period. Looking at her family members, people she'd loved and trusted her entire life, Audrey realized she was no longer fighting for truth. She was fighting for survival, both hers and Mason's.
Audrey spent the next 3 days methodically planning Mason's extraction from their parents' house. She couldn't simply demand he come home with her. Legally, Mason was an adult capable of making his own decisions, and their family had already established a narrative of his mental instability. If she moved too aggressively, they could have him committed for psychiatric evaluation, putting him completely beyond her reach. Instead, she used her position at Sacred Heart Medical Center to quietly research the mysterious Dr. Martinez. The hospital's database system allowed her to search medical professional licenses across Oregon, and what she found made her blood run cold. Dr. Elena Martinez wasn't a professor or a psychiatrist. She was a forensic pathologist specializing in toxicology cases for the state medical examiner's office. Her signature appeared on death certificates involving suspicious poisonings, and she'd testified in several high-profile murder trials over the past decade. Why would their father need insurance papers for a forensic pathologist unless someone was expected to die? Audrey's hands shook as she printed Dr. Martinez's professional profile from the state medical board website. The photograph showed a severe-looking woman in her 50s with calculating eyes that seemed to pierce through the camera lens. Her specializations included post-mortem toxicology analysis, cause of death determination in poisoning cases, and expert testimony in criminal proceedings. The implications were staggering. Someone in her family wasn't just covering up Mason's poisoning, they were planning for its completion, possibly with expert assistance to ensure it looked accidental or self-inflicted. That evening, Audrey drove to a coffee shop in Beaverton, far enough from both Portland and Hillsborough to avoid accidental family encounters. She'd arranged to meet her former college roommate, Detective Sarah Kim, of the Portland Police Bureau. Sarah owed her several favors from their nursing school days when Audrey had covered for her during particularly challenging rotations. "You look like hell, Audrey," Sarah said bluntly, sliding into the booth across from her. At 32, Sarah had developed the sharp-eyed assessment skills of a detective, combined with the direct communication style that had made her successful in a male-dominated profession. "I need advice, and I needed to stay completely off the record until I can figure out what's really happening." Sarah's expression grew serious. "What kind of advice?" Audrey carefully explained the situation, leaving nothing out. Mason's suspicious overdose, the unexplained diazepam, the family's coordinated deception, the ongoing drugging disguised as medication, and now the connection to a forensic pathologist. She watched Sarah's face grow increasingly grim as the details accumulated. "Jesus, Audrey, if even half of what you're telling me is accurate, your brother is in serious danger." Sarah pulled out a small notebook, then thought better of it and put it away. "Off the record, this sounds like attempted murder with ongoing conspiracy to complete the job." "But how do I prove it? Mason's memories are compromised from the drugs they keep giving him, and I don't have access to any physical evidence." "We need to document everything systematically. First priority is getting Mason somewhere safe, where he can detox from whatever they're giving him. Second is preserving evidence. Those pills they're calling his medication, any remaining toxicology samples from the hospital, documentation of the family's inconsistent statements." Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping to a professional whisper. "But Audrey, I have to warn you, if your family is working with a forensic pathologist to stage Mason's death, they're not amateurs. This level of premeditation suggests they have significant resources and probably legal consultation. You're not just fighting your family anymore, you're potentially up against professionals who know how to manipulate the system." The weight of Sarah's words settled over Audrey like a suffocating blanket. Her family wasn't just dysfunctional. They were potentially organized criminals with expert assistance. "What would motivate them to kill Mason?" Audrey asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. "Money, usually. Life insurance, inheritance, elimination of financial burden. Sometimes family secrets that someone threatens to expose." Sarah studied Audrey carefully. "Has Mason ever mentioned knowing something damaging about your family? Any business dealings, legal troubles, hidden debts?" Audrey thought back through years of conversations with Mason. He'd always been the family mediator, the one who smoothed over conflicts and kept everyone connected. But recently, he'd mentioned something...
Wait! About 2 months ago, Mason said something strange.
He was helping Dad organize papers in the basement for tax season, and he found some documents that didn't make sense. Medical bills for treatments none of us remembered having, insurance claims for accidents that never happened. Insurance fraud, Sarah said immediately. That would explain the forensic pathologist connection. If your family has been filing false medical claims, Mason might have stumbled onto evidence that could destroy them financially and legally. The pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity. Mason's art school expenses, their parents' mounting medical bills, Claire's successful real estate business, all potentially funded by systematic insurance fraud. And Mason, with his honest nature and artistic attention to detail, had probably asked uncomfortable questions about the discrepancies he'd discovered. "Sarah, I need to get him out of there tonight." "Not alone, you don't. If they're willing to kill him once, they won't hesitate to escalate if they feel cornered." Sarah checked her watch. "I can't officially get involved without evidence of immediate danger, but I can be nearby when you extract him. Unofficial backup." They spent the next hour planning Mason's removal from the family home. Sarah would park 2 blocks away in an unmarked personal vehicle. Audrey would arrive for a normal family visit, then create a medical emergency scenario that would require immediate transport to a hospital, preferably Sacred Heart, where Audrey had allies and resources. "Once you get him to the hospital, we can run legitimate blood work to document what they've been giving him. That becomes evidence. We can also have him examined by physicians who aren't connected to your family's narrative." At 8:30 p.m., Audrey pulled into her parents' driveway with her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd changed into scrubs to reinforce her medical authority and carried a small bag containing a digital voice recorder, sample containers for pill collection, and a basic first aid kit. The house was quiet. Too quiet for a normal evening. Usually, the television would be playing, or I'd hear her father's woodworking tools in the basement. Tonight, silence hung over the property like a shroud. She found Mason in the living room, slumped in her father's recliner with the glazed expression of someone heavily sedated. A pill cup sat on the side table next to a glass of water, evidence that he'd already received his evening medication. "Mason?" Audrey knelt beside the chair, checking his pulse and pupils. His heart rate was slow but steady, pupils dilated but responsive. "How are you feeling?" "Tired. Really tired. Mom said I needed a double dose tonight because I seemed agitated earlier." Double dose. They were escalating the medication, possibly preparing for a final overdose that would appear to be suicide by someone who couldn't handle his mental health struggles. "Where is everyone?" Audrey asked, helping Mason sit up straighter. "Dad's in the basement. Mom and Claire went to the pharmacy to pick up something. They said they'd be back soon." Perfect. This was the opportunity she'd hoped for. "Mason, I need you to focus for a minute. Do you trust me?" He nodded slowly, though his coordination was clearly compromised. "I'm going to tell you something that might sound crazy, but I need you to believe me. The pills they're giving you aren't your prescribed medication. They're systematically drugging you with Valium, and I think they're planning to give you a fatal overdose that will look like suicide." Mason's eyes widened, some clarity penetrating the pharmaceutical fog. "What? But they're my family. Why would they want to hurt me?" "Because you found something in Dad's papers. Something about insurance fraud. You asked questions they couldn't answer, and now you're a threat to them." The sound of a car in the driveway made them both freeze. Through the front window, Audrey could see headlights approaching, Patricia and Claire returning earlier than expected. "Mason, we have to leave right now. Can you walk?" "I think so." He struggled to stand, swaying dangerously. Audrey supported his weight, guiding him toward the side door she'd used as her entrance. But as they reached the hallway, Robert's voice boomed from the basement stairs. "Patricia? Is that you? I thought you weren't coming back until later." They were trapped between Robert emerging from below and Patricia entering from the front. Audrey's mind raced through options as footsteps approached from both directions. "Mason, when I say run, head straight for my car. Don't look back, don't hesitate, just run." Her brother nodded, fear burning through his sedation like acid. The basement door opened just as the front door's lock clicked. Robert appeared first,
his face shifting from confusion to alarm when he saw Audrey supporting Mason near the exit. "What's going on here?" Robert demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to controlling situations. "Mason needs medical attention," Audrey said firmly. "His pupils are dilated, his coordination is impaired, and his speech is slurred. I'm taking him to the emergency room." Patricia's voice called from the front hallway. "Audrey, what are you doing here so late?" "Now!" Audrey shouted to Mason, pushing him toward the door. But Robert moved faster than she had anticipated for a man recovering from heart surgery. He grabbed Mason's arm, yanking him back with surprising strength. "Nobody's going anywhere," Robert growled. "Mason is exactly where he needs to be." The facade was finally dropping. Audrey saw the calculation in her father's eyes, the cold determination of someone who'd already decided Mason had to die. This wasn't about mental health or family concern. It was about eliminating a witness to their crimes. "Dad, let him go," Audrey demanded. But Patricia appeared behind Robert, and her expression matched his perfectly. "Audrey, sweetheart," Patricia said with chilling calm, "you're clearly upset and not thinking clearly. Why don't you sit down and let us explain everything?" Looking at her parents' faces, people who'd raised her, loved her, taught her right from wrong, Audrey realized she was staring at strangers who were perfectly willing to murder their own son to protect their secrets. The commitment crystallized in that moment. She would save Mason, no matter what it cost her, even if it meant destroying the only family she'd ever known.
The confrontation in her parents' hallway lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Audrey watched her father's grip tighten on Mason's arm, while her mother moved to block the front door. Claire's car door slammed outside, adding another adversary to an already impossible situation. "Sarah, now would be good," Audrey whispered into her phone, hoping the detective was close enough to hear the urgency in her voice. Robert's eyes narrowed at the mention of an unfamiliar name. "Who's Sarah?" Before Audrey could answer, she made a desperate decision. Grabbing the ceramic lamp from the hallway table, she hurled it toward the front window. The crash of breaking glass shattered the tense silence, and car alarms began wailing throughout the neighborhood. In the chaos that followed, Mason broke free from Robert's grip and stumbled toward the side door. Audrey was right behind him, but Patricia lunged forward, catching Audrey's arm with surprising strength. "You don't understand what you're destroying," Patricia hissed, her maternal mask completely gone. 20 years of careful planning, and you're going to ruin everything for some misguided sense of righteousness. 20 years? Audrey stared at her mother in horror. How long have you been committing insurance fraud? Claire burst through the front door, taking in the scene with the calculated assessment of someone who'd been expecting trouble. "Mom, Dad, we need to contain the situation immediately." "The neighbors heard the crash," Robert said grimly. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before someone calls the police." Audrey realized with growing terror that her family was speaking in code, communicating with the efficiency of people who'd handled crises together before. They weren't panicking. They were implementing a contingency plan. Outside, she could hear Mason calling her name, his voice weak but determined. At least he'd made it to her car. "Let me go," Audrey demanded, trying to pull free from Patricia's grip. "Mason needs medical attention." "Mason needs to fulfill his purpose," Claire said coldly, "just like the rest of us have been doing for years. You're the only one who's been too self-absorbed to contribute to the family's survival." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Contribute to what? Murder? "Insurance claims," Robert corrected matter-of-factly. "Strategic medical events that ensure our family's financial security. Mason was supposed to be the final piece, a tragic suicide that would pay for Claire's business expansion and our comfortable retirement." Audrey felt sick. "How many people have you killed?" Patricia's laugh was bitter. "Killed, Audrey, sweetheart. We've never killed anyone. We've simply facilitated natural conclusions to difficult situations. Uncle Jerry's heart attack, Grandma Ruth's stroke, your cousin Danny's car accident, all genuine medical events that happened to occur after we'd adjusted their insurance coverage."
The room spun around Audrey as she processed the scope of their crimes. Her family wasn't just planning Mason's murder, they'd been systematically killing relatives for decades, making each death look natural while collecting massive insurance payouts. "You're all psychopaths," she whispered. "We're survivors," Claire snapped. "Do you think your precious nursing career would have been possible without the money from Uncle Jerry's life insurance? Do you think Mason's art supplies and college tuition materialized from thin air?" The implications crashed over Audrey like a tsunami. Her entire adult life had been funded by blood money. Every achievement, every moment of pride in her independence had been built on a foundation of systematic murder. Car doors slammed outside, followed by authoritative voices. Sarah had arrived with backup, real backup from the sound of it. "Portland Police! Is everyone all right in there?" Patricia's grip on Audrey's arm tightened to a painful degree. "You called the police on your own family?" "I called them because my own family is trying to commit murder." Audrey shut back. Robert moved toward the broken window, peering through the curtains. 3 patrol cars and an unmarked vehicle. "Sarah Kim is with them. I recognize her from the newspaper coverage of the Morrison case last year." Audrey was amazed that her father could identify a detective by sight until she realized that someone running long-term insurance fraud schemes would naturally keep track of local law enforcement personnel. "We stick to the story," Claire commanded, slipping into crisis management mode. Mason had a psychiatric episode. Audrey became concerned and overreacted. The broken window was an accident during the family dispute. We're all worried about Mason's mental health and want him to receive appropriate treatment. "They'll test his blood," Audrey warned. "They'll find the Valium you've been giving him." "Prescribed by Dr. Martinez for acute anxiety following his suicide attempt," Patricia said smoothly. "All properly documented and medically justified." The revelation that Dr. Martinez had been prescribing medication for Mason explained how they'd maintained the legal fiction of his treatment. The forensic pathologist wasn't just planning his death, she was actively participating in his ongoing poisoning while creating a paper trail that would support the suicide narrative.
"Portland Police, we need everyone to come outside with your hands visible." "Time to perform," Claire murmured, straightening her clothes and composing her expression into one of concerned family member. But as they moved toward the door, Audrey heard Mason's voice from outside, stronger than she'd expected. "Officers, my name is Mason Green. My family has been drugging me with medication I didn't know I was taking. My sister Audrey discovered they've been giving me Valium while telling me it was my prescribed lorazepam. I think they're trying to kill me." The statement was clear, coherent, and delivered with the conviction of someone whose mind was finally clearing. Whatever adrenaline Mason's system had produced during their escape was burning through the pharmaceutical fog. Patricia's face went white. "He's having another psychotic episode. This is exactly what Dr. Martinez warned us about, paranoid delusions targeting family members." But as they moved toward the door, Audrey heard Mason's voice from outside, stronger than she'd expected. "Mrs. Green," Sarah addressed Patricia formally, "we're going to need to see the prescription bottles for all medication currently being administered to Mason." "Of course," Patricia replied, but her voice carried a tremor Audrey had never heard before. "Though I should mention that Mason has been experiencing paranoid episodes. Dr. Martinez warned us that patients in his condition often develop conspiracy theories about their own treatment." Sarah's expression remained professionally neutral, but Audrey caught the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated skepticism. "We'll definitely want to speak with Dr. Martinez. In the meantime, Mason has requested medical evaluation at Sacred Heart Medical Center to verify what substances are currently in his system." "That's completely unnecessary," Claire interjected, stepping forward with her most authoritative demeanor. "As his family, we can ensure he receives appropriate psychiatric care through proper channels." "Actually," one of the patrol officers spoke up, "as an adult, Mr. Green has the right to request his own medical evaluation. We're prepared to transport him to Sacred Heart for assessment." Audrey watched her family's careful plans crumble in real time. They'd prepared for Mason to die quietly in their controlled environment, with their chosen medical examiner ready to certify the cause of death. They hadn't prepared for him to survive long enough to request independent medical evaluation. Robert tried one final manipulation.
"Officers, our son is clearly unwell. His art professor at Portland State University has been concerned about his mental stability for months. We have documentation of his declining academic performance and erratic behavior." But Mason stepped forward, his voice steady despite the drugs still affecting his coordination. "My academic performance has been excellent. Professor Martinez, the real Professor Martinez who teaches sculpture, recommended me for graduate school programs just 2 weeks ago. These people have been systematically poisoning me, and they've been using the name of a forensic pathologist to create fake medical records." Sarah's eyebrows rose at the mention of forensic pathology. "Mr. Green, can you be more specific about this other Dr. Martinez?" As Mason began explaining what he'd discovered about the insurance documents and the mysterious medical professional their father had been consulting, Audrey saw her parents and sister exchange looks of barely concealed panic. Their carefully constructed world of profitable murder was being exposed by the very person they'd intended to be their final victim. But Audrey also noticed something that chilled her to the bone. Despite the police presence and the collapse of their immediate plans, her family members weren't showing the reaction of criminals caught in the act. They were showing the frustration of people whose business operations had been temporarily disrupted. They weren't giving up. They were already planning their next move. As Mason was helped into the ambulance for transport to Sacred Heart, Patricia approached Audrey with tears streaming down her face. Tears that looked genuine until you saw the calculation in her eyes. "Audrey, sweetheart, I know you think you're helping Mason, but you're destroying our family. Everything we've built, everything we've sacrificed for, it's all going to be lost because you couldn't trust us to handle a difficult situation." Looking at her mother's performance, Audrey realized that this was how they'd operated for 20 years. They'd convinced themselves that systematic murder was simply handling difficult situations, that insurance fraud was family financial planning, that poisoning Mason was ensuring everyone's security. They weren't just criminals. They were criminals who genuinely believed they were the victims in this situation. The fight was far from over, and Audrey was about to learn just how dangerous it could be to threaten people who'd spent decades perfecting the art of making murder look like natural death.
The next 72 hours at Sacred Heart Medical Center became a whirlwind of medical tests, police interviews, and devastating revelations that shattered every assumption Audrey had held about her family's history. Mason's detoxification process revealed not just Valium in dangerous concentrations, but traces of 3 other medications he'd never been prescribed. A cocktail designed to create the perfect storm of apparent mental instability and accidental overdose. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the hospital's chief toxicologist, delivered her preliminary findings with the grim professionalism of someone who'd seen too many suspicious poisoning cases. Mr. Green's blood work shows systematic administration of benzodiazepines, antipsychotics, and mood stabilizers over approximately 6 weeks. The combination would have created severe cognitive impairment, memory loss, and eventually respiratory depression, leading to death. Audrey sat beside Mason's hospital bed, watching her brother's personality slowly return as the pharmaceutical fog lifted from his system. The transformation was remarkable and heartbreaking. As his mind cleared, Mason began remembering details from the weeks leading up to his hospitalization that painted an even more sinister picture of their family's operations. "I remember now," Mason said, during his interview with Detective Kim and her partner, Detective Rodriguez from the Financial Crimes Unit. "It wasn't just finding those insurance documents in Dad's basement. I started asking questions about Aunt Linda's death last year." Audrey felt her heart stop. "What about Aunt Linda?" "She died of complications from diabetes, remember? But she'd been managing her diabetes perfectly for 15 years. I was helping her organize her medical supplies just a week before she died, and her blood sugar logs were completely normal. Then suddenly she's found dead from diabetic shock." Detective Rodriguez leaned forward with interest. "Did you share these concerns with your family?" "I mentioned it to Mom about 3 days before I ended up in the hospital. I said it seems strange that Linda would suddenly lose control of her diabetes management." Mason's voice grew stronger as his memory solidified.
Mom got really upset and said I was being disrespectful to Linda's memory. Then Dad suggested I might need to see someone about my anxiety levels. The pattern was becoming clear with horrifying precision. Mason had identified another suspicious death in their family network, asked uncomfortable questions, and been immediately targeted for elimination before he could investigate further or involve outside authorities. Detective Kim consulted her growing file of evidence. We have requested medical records for all family members who died in the past 5 years. The insurance payouts alone total over $3 million, all paid to various family members as beneficiaries. $3 million. Audrey tried to process the scope of her family's criminal enterprise. No wonder Claire could afford to expand her real estate business. No wonder their parents had been able to maintain their comfortable lifestyle, despite Robert's limited construction pension and Patricia's part-time work at the local library. But the breakthrough that changed everything came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elena Martinez herself called the hospital requesting to speak with Mason about his ongoing psychiatric treatment. She wants to visit him, Detective Kim explained to Audrey and Mason during their strategy meeting, which gives us an opportunity to document her involvement in this conspiracy. Sarah had coordinated with the district attorney's office to set up a controlled meeting. They would allow Dr. Martinez to visit Mason while recording the conversation to capture evidence of her participation in the systematic poisoning and planned murder. "Are you sure about this?" Audrey asked Mason, studying his face for any sign of the vulnerability that had made him such an easy target. "If she's been working with our family for years, she's going to be skilled at manipulation." "I need to do this," Mason replied with determination that reminded Audrey of the strong, confident brother she'd known before the poisoning began. "She's probably killed dozens of people by providing medical cover for suspicious deaths. If I can get her to reveal how she operates, we might be able to save other families from going through what we're experiencing." The meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon in Mason's hospital room. Detective Kim and her team positioned themselves in the adjoining room with audio and video recording equipment, while Audrey remained visible as Mason's support person, but far enough away to avoid appearing threatening to Dr. Martinez. When Dr. Martinez arrived, Audrey was struck by how different she looked from her official photograph. In person, she appeared maternal and concerned, carrying flowers and speaking in gentle tones that would have been completely convincing if Audrey hadn't known the truth about her involvement. "Mason, dear boy, I've been so worried about you," Dr. Martinez said, settling into the chair beside his bed with practiced ease. "Your parents told me you've been having paranoid episodes. I brought some medication that should help stabilize your mood." Mason accepted the small pill bottle she offered, but instead of taking the medication, he set it on his bedside table. "Dr. Martinez, I've been thinking about our previous conversations. Can you remind me when we first met?"
A flash of uncertainty crossed the doctor's face. "We met after your hospitalization, of course. I was consulted about your ongoing psychiatric care. But I have memories of meeting you before that. At my parents' house, maybe 2 months ago? You were discussing something with Dad about insurance documentation." Dr. Martinez's composure slipped slightly. "I think your memory is still affected by the trauma of your suicide attempt. Sometimes patients develop false memories during recovery." "What suicide attempt?" Mason asked with innocent curiosity. "I never attempted suicide. I was poisoned by someone who wanted me to die, but I definitely didn't try to kill myself." The room fell silent, except for the steady beeping of Mason's monitors. Dr. Martinez's maternal facade cracked as she processed Mason's clear, coherent statement. "Mason, you're clearly still experiencing some confusion about the events leading to your hospitalization," she said carefully. "Your family is very concerned about your mental state." "My family tried to murder me," Mason stated flatly, "and you helped them by providing medical documentation to make it look like suicide. How many other families have you helped murder their relatives?" Dr. Martinez stood abruptly, her flowers forgotten on the floor.
I think this conversation should continue when you're feeling more stable. But Mason wasn't finished. I know about Uncle Jerry's heart attack. I know about Grandma Ruth's stroke. I know about Aunt Linda's diabetes complications. You were the pathologist who signed off on all of their deaths, weren't you? Those were all natural deaths from documented medical conditions, Dr. Martinez replied, but her voice carried the strain of someone whose carefully constructed lies were collapsing. Natural deaths that happened to occur right after my family increased their life insurance policies and right after the victims started asking questions about family finances. Mason's voice grew stronger with each accusation. How much do they pay you for each death certificate you falsify? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Dr. Martinez looked toward the door, clearly calculating whether she could leave without damaging her position further. You can't prove any of these accusations, and a young man who recently attempted suicide isn't going to be a credible witness against respected medical professionals. But I can prove them, Mason replied calmly, reaching for the pill bottle she'd brought. Because you just tried to give me medication without any legal authority to do so, and because everything you've said in this room has been recorded. Dr. Martinez's face went white as the implications sank in. She'd been so focused on maintaining her cover story that she'd walked directly into a law enforcement trap. The bottle you gave me contains fentanyl, not psychiatric medication, fentanyl. Enough to kill someone who's already been weakened by weeks of systematic poisoning. The silence that followed was only broken by the sound of Detective Kim entering the room with her badge clearly displayed. Dr. Elena Martinez, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and medical fraud. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Dr. Martinez looked directly at Audrey with an expression of pure hatred. You have no idea what you've destroyed. Your family's arrangement provided security for dozens of people. We made sure deaths were painless and appeared natural. We prevented suffering. You prevented nothing, Audrey replied firmly. You enabled murder for profit. But even as Dr. Martinez was led away, Audrey realized their victory was incomplete. The forensic pathologist was just one piece of her family's criminal network. Robert, Patricia, and Claire were still free, and they'd had days to prepare for the possibility that their medical accomplice might be arrested. Detective Kim confirmed Audrey's concerns as they reviewed the recorded confession. Dr. Martinez mentioned dozens of people and arrangements that suggest your family has been working with other medical professionals. This conspiracy might be much larger than we initially suspected. How much larger? Mason asked. We're talking about a potential network of corrupt medical professionals, insurance agents, and families willing to murder their relatives for profit. Dr. Martinez's admission that deaths were made to appear natural suggests they have systems in place to avoid detection by normal investigative procedures. The scoop of the conspiracy was staggering. Audrey had thought she was fighting to save her brother from their murderous parents. Instead, she'd uncovered what might be one of the largest systematic insurance fraud and murder operations in Oregon's history. But with Dr. Martinez's confession recorded and Mason's testimony documented, they finally had the evidence needed to bring down the entire network. The major breakthrough had come not from detective work or medical analysis, but from Mason's courage to confront his would-be killer directly. For the first time since this nightmare began, Audrey allowed herself to hope that justice might actually be possible.
The arrest of Dr. Martinez should have been the beginning of the end for her family's criminal enterprise. Instead, it triggered a series of events that nearly destroyed everything Audrey had fought to protect. Within hours of the arrest making local news, Audrey's phone began ringing with calls from numbers she didn't recognize. When she finally answered one, thinking it might be a reporter, the voice on the other end chilled her to the bone. Ms. Green, my name is Jonathan Blackwood. I represent certain interests that have been affected by your recent activities. I think we need to have a conversation. The man's tone was professionally polite, but something in his delivery made Audrey's nursing instincts scream danger. I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about.
Dr. Martinez provided services to a network of families across the Pacific Northwest. Her arrest has created significant complications for people who valued discretion in their end-of-life planning. These people are understandably concerned about exposure. Audrey felt sick. The conspiracy wasn't just larger than she'd imagined. It was organized to the point of having legal representation and damage control protocols. Your brother's accusations have already triggered investigations into 17 suspicious deaths across 3 states, Blackwood continued. Families who thought their arrangements were confidential are now facing scrutiny. This creates liability issues that need to be managed. Managed how? Audrey asked, though she dreaded the answer. Meet me tomorrow at 2 p.m. at Pioneer Courthouse Square. Come alone and bring your brother's medical records from Sacred Heart. We need to discuss how to minimize the damage his testimony might cause. The call ended before Audrey could respond. She immediately contacted Detective Kim, but Sarah's reaction was more alarming than reassuring. Jesus, Audrey, if they have a lawyer making contact, this network is even more sophisticated than we thought. Sarah's voice carried the strain of someone facing a case that had spiraled beyond manageable proportions. Blackwood isn't just any attorney. He's known for representing organized crime families. High-end stuff. Very discreet. Very effective. What does that mean for Mason's safety? It means they're not just going to roll over and accept prosecution. If Mason's testimony can expose a multi-state murder network, they'll do whatever it takes to discredit or silence him. The next morning brought worse news. Mason woke up to find his hospital room surrounded by security guards who weren't employed by Sacred Heart. Detective Rodriguez arrived with a court order that made Audrey's blood run cold. A federal judge has ordered Mason into protective custody pending psychiatric evaluation, Rodriguez explained grimly. The evaluation was requested by his legal guardian. Mason doesn't have a legal guardian. He's 22 years old. According to court filings submitted yesterday, your parents have been appointed emergency guardians due to Mason's demonstrated mental instability and recent suicide attempt. They're claiming he poses a danger to himself and others. The trap was elegant and devastating. By having Mason declared mentally incompetent, her family could prevent his testimony from being used in court while gaining legal authority to make medical decisions on his behalf. They could resume drugging him under the guise of psychiatric treatment, this time with full legal protection. We're fighting the guardianship order, Rodriguez assured them, but it could take weeks to get a hearing. In the meantime, Mason will be transferred to Oregon State Hospital for evaluation. Audrey knew Oregon State Hospital's reputation. Patients could disappear into the system for months or years, especially if their families were determined to keep them committed. Once Mason was transferred there, she might never see him again, at least not alive. There has to be something we can do, Audrey pleaded. This is obviously a setup. The judge who signed the order is Helen Morrison, Rodriguez said carefully. She's known for taking psychiatric recommendations very seriously, especially when they involve family safety concerns. The name Morrison triggered a memory from Blackwood's phone call. Detective, didn't you mention something about the Morrison case when you were identifying Sarah at my parents' house? Sarah's face went pale. Judge Morrison's husband died 6 months ago from complications of Alzheimer's disease. The death was investigated because neighbors reported suspicious circumstances, but the case was closed after the medical examiner ruled it natural causes. Who was the medical examiner?
Dr. Elena Martinez. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Judge Morrison wasn't just randomly assigned to Mason's case. She was likely another family member who'd used the murder network to eliminate an inconvenient relative. Now she was repaying the favor by railroading Mason into psychiatric custody. "How deep does this conspiracy go?" Audrey whispered.
We're starting to think it involves judges, medical examiners, hospital administrators, insurance investigators, and possibly law enforcement personnel, Sarah admitted. What you and Mason uncovered wasn't just a family crime, it's institutional corruption on a massive scale. The transfer was scheduled for that afternoon. As orderlies prepared to move Mason to the psychiatric facility, Audrey felt the walls closing in around them. Everything they'd fought for, every piece of evidence they'd gathered, every moment of hope they'd experienced, it was all being systematically dismantled by people with the power to manipulate the legal system itself. But Mason surprised her one final time. As the orderlies approached with the gurney, he looked directly at Audrey and mouthed words that only she could see. "Check the basement." Before she could ask what he meant, Mason was sedated for transport and wheeled away from Sacred Heart Medical Center. The last thing she saw was his eyes, still clear despite the medication, watching her with an expression that begged her not to give up. That evening, Audrey made the most dangerous decision of her life. She drove to her parents' house in Hillsborough, not to confront them, but to search for whatever Mason had discovered in the basement that had started this entire nightmare. The house was empty. Her parents were probably at the hospital playing concerned relatives while Mason was processed into psychiatric custody. Audrey used her key to enter through the side door, her heart hammering as she made her way to the basement stairs. The basement had been Robert's domain for decades, filled with woodworking tools, storage boxes, and file cabinets containing family documents. But as Audrey searched systematically through the organized chaos, she began to understand why Mason had been so disturbed by what he'd found. Hidden behind a false back in one of the file cabinets, she discovered a manila envelope containing photographs, documents, and correspondence that revealed the true scope of her family's activities. The photos showed Robert and Patricia at social gatherings with people Audrey didn't recognize, until she realized they were other families from obituaries she'd seen over the years. Families who'd lost elderly relatives to sudden medical complications. The documents were even more damning. Detailed correspondence with insurance companies, medical professionals, and legal representatives outlined a systematic approach to identifying suitable candidates for quote-unquote natural intervention. The language was clinical and euphemistic, but the intent was unmistakable. They were operating a murder-for-hire service targeting elderly relatives with substantial life insurance policies. But the most shocking discovery was a ledger documenting payments made and received over the past 15 years. Her family hadn't just been killing their own relatives, they'd been contracting their services to other families willing to pay for discreet elimination of inconvenient family members. The ledger showed payments ranging from $50,000 to $500,000 per intervention, depending on the complexity of the case and the size of the insurance payout. Total earnings over 15 years exceeded $20 million. As Audrey photographed the evidence with her phone, she heard car doors slamming in the driveway. Her parents had returned early, possibly alerted by security systems or neighbors who'd noticed lights in the basement. Footsteps crossed the floor above her as Audrey frantically finished documenting the evidence. She could hear Patricia's voice discussing Mason's transfer and the need to accelerate our timeline for damage control. Blackwood says we have maybe 48 hours before the federal investigation expands beyond Martinez. If Audrey doesn't cooperate, we'll need to implement the family emergency protocol. Audrey's blood turned to ice. There was a protocol for dealing with family members who threatened their operation, and she was apparently about to become subject to it. The basement stairs creaked as someone began descending. Audrey quickly replaced the documents and closed the file cabinet, but there was no other exit from the basement. She was trapped with evidence of a $20 million murder conspiracy, facing family members who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill anyone who threatened their operation. As Patricia appeared at the bottom of the stairs carrying what looked like a medical kit, Audrey realized that the crisis point she'd been dreading had finally arrived. Her family had decided she was too dangerous to live alive, and they had all the tools necessary to make her death look like another tragic accident. The only question was whether anyone would be left to tell the truth about what really happened to Mason,
to her, and to all the other victims whose deaths had funded her family's prosperous lifestyle. Looking at her mother's face, now carrying the same cold calculation she'd seen in Patricia's eyes during Mason's confrontation, Audrey understood that she was about to discover exactly how far her family would go to protect their secrets. The answer, she suspected, was farther than any loving family should ever be willing to go.
Patricia reached the bottom of the basement stairs carrying not just a medical kit, but the confident demeanor of someone who'd performed this particular procedure many times before. In the harsh fluorescent light, Audrey could see her mother's face had transformed completely. Gone was any pretense of maternal love or family concern, replaced by the calculating focus of a professional killer. "Audrey, sweetheart, I had hoped it wouldn't come to this," Patricia said, setting down the kit and opening it to reveal syringes, vials, and medical supplies. "But you forced our hand by involving outsiders in family business." "Mom, please," Audrey said, backing against the file cabinet she'd just been searching. "I'm your daughter." "You're a threat," Patricia corrected, matter-of-factly, just like Mason became a threat when he started asking questions. The difference is that Mason could be discredited as mentally unstable. You're a healthcare professional. Your testimony would carry too much weight. Robert's footsteps creaked overhead as he moved through the house, and Audrey realized he was probably securing exits and preparing for cleanup after her elimination. They'd done this before, not just to elderly relatives, but to anyone who discovered their operation. But as Patricia prepared a syringe with practiced efficiency, Audrey felt something shift inside her. The paralyzing fear that had controlled her throughout this ordeal began transforming into something much more powerful. Rage, not just at her parents' willingness to kill her, but at every life they'd destroyed, every family they'd manipulated, every person who died to fund their comfortable lifestyle. "How many people have you murdered in this basement?" Audrey asked, her voice steadier than she'd expected. Patricia paused in her preparations. "Murdered is such an ugly word. We've provided peaceful transitions for people who were suffering while ensuring their families received appropriate financial compensation. You murdered Uncle Jerry for his insurance money. You killed Grandma Ruth because she was asking questions about family finances. You poisoned Aunt Linda because Mason noticed something suspicious about her death." "Uncle Jerry was dying of cancer anyway," Patricia replied defensively. "Ruth was developing dementia and would have required expensive care. Linda was threatening to audit the family trust fund. We simply expedited natural conclusions while maximizing benefit to surviving relatives." The casual way her mother justified mass murder sparked something primal in Audrey's chest. This woman had raised her, taught her right from wrong, held her when she cried. And now she was explaining murder with the detached professionalism of a business consultant. "And now you're going to kill me because I interfered with your business model?" "You're going to have a tragic accident," Patricia corrected, approaching with a prepared syringe. "Overcome with guilt about falsely accusing your loving family, you'll take your own life using medications stolen from the hospital. Very sad, but believable given the stress you've been under." But as Patricia moved closer, Audrey noticed something that changed everything. Her mother's medical kit was the same emergency kit that pediatric nurses used at Sacred Heart, and Audrey knew every piece of equipment in that kit better than Patricia did. "What did you put in the syringe?" Audrey asked, genuinely curious despite her terror. "Insulin overdose. Quick, relatively painless, and it mimics suicide by healthcare worker perfectly. The medical examiner will assume professional knowledge led to method selection." Insulin overdose. Patricia had made a critical mistake. As a pediatric nurse, Audrey knew that insulin overdoses were survivable if treated immediately with glucose administration. And there was an emergency glucose injection pen in every medical kit, including the one Patricia had brought. More importantly, Patricia was standing between Audrey and the basement stairs, but she wasn't blocking access to Robert's woodworking bench, where an array of tools offered potential weapons. "Mom, before you do this, I need to know, was any of it real? Did you ever actually love Mason and me, or were we just future assets in your murder business?"
Patricia's expression softened slightly, and for a moment Audrey glimpsed the woman who'd bandaged her scraped knees and helped with homework. Of course I loved you. I still love you. That's what makes this so difficult. If you love me, then explain how this started. Help me understand how my mother became a serial killer. The question seemed to catch Patricia off guard. She lowered the syringe slightly, and Audrey realized her mother actually wanted to explain, wanted someone to understand the twisted logic that had guided 15 years of systematic murder.
It started with your father's construction accident, Patricia began, settling onto a workbench stool while keeping the syringe ready. He was injured on the job, but the company fought the workers' compensation claim. We were facing bankruptcy, losing the house, watching our entire life collapse. Audrey remembered that period. She'd been 17, working part-time to help with expenses while maintaining her grades for nursing school applications. Your great-uncle Walter was dying of emphysema, suffering terribly, spending thousands on treatments that weren't working. He mentioned that he'd increased his life insurance policy and named our family as beneficiaries. He was in so much pain, Audrey. When I helped him with his evening medications, it seemed merciful to adjust the dosage slightly. The rationalization was chilling in its banality. Patricia had convinced herself that murder was an act of compassion, that stealing someone's remaining time was somehow a gift. Walter died peacefully in his sleep, Patricia said wistfully. The insurance payout saved our house and paid for your college tuition. You became a nurse because Uncle Walter's insurance money made your education possible. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Audrey's entire career, her identity as someone who saved lives, had been built on her great-uncle's murder. After that, it became easier to recognize when family members were suffering unnecessarily, and when their suffering was creating financial strain for everyone else. We developed better methods, more sophisticated approaches. Dr. Martinez helped us understand how to make deaths look natural. You're talking about $20 million in insurance fraud. This wasn't about mercy. It was about money. Patricia's face hardened again. It was about survival. Do you think your nursing salary could have supported Mason's college expenses and art supplies? Do you think Robert's pension could have covered my arthritis treatments and his heart surgery? We created financial security for our entire family through careful planning and strategic decision-making. Strategic decision-making. That's how she thought about murder. But Patricia's explanation had given Audrey crucial time to position herself closer to the workbench. As her mother raised the syringe again, Audrey made her move. She grabbed Robert's heavy ball-peen hammer and swung it at Patricia's wrist, connecting with a sickening crack that sent the syringe flying across the basement. Patricia screamed and stumbled backward, clutching her broken wrist. "Robert!" Patricia shouted toward the ceiling. "She's fighting back!" Heavy footsteps thundered across the floor above as Audrey grabbed the medical kit and searched for the glucose injection pen. She found it just as Robert's boots appeared on the basement stairs. "Audrey, what have you done?" Robert's voice carried disappointment rather than anger, as if she'd merely misbehaved rather than fought for her life. "I'm ending this," Audrey replied, backing toward the far corner of the basement where Robert's power tools offered potential weapons. "All of it. The murders, the insurance fraud, the corruption. It's over." Robert descended the stairs slowly, carrying what looked like a construction nail gun. "Sweetheart, you don't understand the complexity of what we've built here. We're part of something much larger than our family. If you destroy our operation, innocent people will suffer. Innocent people have been suffering for 15 years while you murdered their relatives. The only thing I'm destroying is a criminal conspiracy that should have been stopped decades ago. The network provides services that desperate families need. End-of-life care is expensive. Medical interventions are cruel. We offer alternatives that benefit everyone involved." As her father moved closer, Audrey realized that both her parents genuinely believed their own justifications. They had spent so many years rationalizing murder that they'd convinced themselves they were providing a valuable service rather than committing systematic genocide for profit. But their delusions didn't change the fact that they were prepared to kill her to protect their operation.
Audrey activated the power saw on Robert's workbench, the screaming blade filling the basement with noise that would mask any sounds of struggle from neighbors. Her parents had taught her that family loyalty was the highest virtue, that blood was thicker than water, that she should always protect the people she loved. Now she was going to use those lessons to protect the one family member who deserved protection, Mason, even if it meant destroying everyone else she'd ever called family. The transformation was complete. Audrey was no longer a victim trying to survive her family's crimes. She was a warrior determined to end them, whatever the cost.
The screaming power saw in Audrey's hands had an unexpected effect on her parents. Instead of advancing with their weapons, both Robert and Patricia froze, perhaps finally recognizing that their daughter had crossed the same moral threshold they'd crossed 15 years earlier, the willingness to use violence to protect what mattered most. But Audrey wasn't interested in becoming like them. She was interested in ending them. "Dad, put down the nail gun and step away from Mom," she commanded, keeping the saw between herself and her parents. "We're going to walk upstairs together, and you're going to call Detective Kim and confess to everything." Robert's laugh was bitter. "Audrey, you don't understand how deep this goes. Even if Patricia and I confessed, the network would continue operating. We're replaceable parts in a much larger machine." "Then I'll take down the entire machine," Audrey replied, with conviction that surprised even her. "Starting with you two and working my way up through every corrupt official, every complicit medical professional, and every client family who paid you to murder their relatives." What happened next changed everything. Patricia, still clutching her broken wrist, looked directly at Audrey with something resembling pride. "You know what, Robert? She's right. Look at her. She's finally become strong enough to do what needs to be done. Maybe it's time." The admission hung in the basement air like a toxic cloud. Patricia wasn't conceding defeat. She was expressing approval that Audrey had developed the ruthlessness necessary to eliminate obstacles. In her twisted worldview, Audrey's willingness to threaten her own parents proved she'd inherited the family trait that made their criminal enterprise possible. But Audrey had misunderstood everything. Audrey's transformation wasn't about becoming like them, it was about becoming strong enough to stop them. The standoff ended when sirens began wailing in the distance, growing louder as they approached the house. Detective Kim's voice carried from outside, amplified by a megaphone. "This is Portland Police. The house is surrounded. Robert and Patricia Green, exit through the front door with your hands visible." Audrey felt relief flood through her system. Somehow, the cavalry had arrived at the exact right moment. "How did they know?" Robert demanded, his nail gun now seeming pitiful against the sound of multiple police units surrounding their property. "Because Mason didn't just tell me to check the basement," Audrey realized with growing admiration for her brother's strategic thinking. "He told me to check it because he knew I'd find evidence, and he knew that when our parents tried to silence me, it would prove they were willing to kill family members to protect their operation." The basement door opened and Detective Kim appeared at the top of the stairs, weapon drawn but pointed towards the ceiling. "Audrey, are you injured?" "I'm alive," I called back, "but Mom has a broken wrist and Dad's armed with a nail gun." "Mr. and Mrs. Green, I need you to drop your weapons and move slowly towards the stairs," Kim commanded, with professional authority. As her parents complied, moving like defeated generals surrendering after a lost war, Audrey shut off the power saw and followed them upstairs. The living room that had hosted countless family gatherings was now filled with law enforcement officers processing evidence and documenting the scene. Detective Rodriguez approached Audrey with an expression of grim satisfaction. "The evidence you photographed in the basement has already led to arrest warrants for 17 people across 3 states. Jonathan Blackwood was taken into custody 2 hours ago when he tried to flee the country." "What about Judge Morrison?" "Federal marshals arrested her at her home this morning. The corruption investigation has expanded to include 2 other judges, 4 medical examiners, and a network of insurance agents who facilitated fraudulent claims." The scope of the arrests was staggering. But Audrey only had one priority. What about Mason? Is he safe? Mason was transferred from Oregon State Hospital to Sacred Heart this morning after federal agents discovered that his psychiatric evaluation was being conducted by Dr. Harrison Webb, another pathologist who'd been falsifying death certificates for the network. Mason's completely cleared of all mental health allegations. As if summoned by her thoughts, Mason appeared in the front doorway, flanked by federal agents, but walking under his own power. The pharmaceutical fog had completely lifted from his eyes, replaced by the clear focus of someone who'd survived an assassination attempt and lived to expose his would-be killers. Audrey. Mason crossed the room and embraced his sister with the fierce gratitude of someone who understood exactly how close they'd both come to joining their family's list of victims. "How did you know I'd find the evidence?" Audrey asked. "Because I knew you'd never give up," Mason replied simply. "And because I'd already found some of it weeks ago, before they started drugging me. I just needed someone I could trust to put all the pieces together." Over the following months, the full extent of the conspiracy emerged through trials, plea bargains, and investigative reporting that shocked the Pacific Northwest. The Green family's murder-for-hire operation had facilitated 127 suspicious deaths over 15 years, generating over $40 million in fraudulent insurance payouts. Robert and Patricia were sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole after their attempts to claim they were providing mercy killings were demolished by evidence showing their victims had been healthy individuals who'd become inconvenient to their families. Claire received 25 years for her role in laundering money through her real estate business and recruiting new client families. Dr. Martinez and her network of corrupt medical professionals faced federal charges for conspiracy, murder, and medical fraud. Judge Morrison and 2 other judicial officials were impeached and removed from office before facing their own criminal trials. But the most profound impact wasn't measured in arrests or sentences. It was measured in lives saved. The exposure of the network prevented dozens of planned murders targeting elderly relatives whose families had already made arrangements for their natural deaths. Audrey testified before congressional committees investigating corruption in state medical examiner offices, helping to create new oversight protocols that would make similar conspiracies much more difficult to operate. Her testimony was credited with inspiring similar investigations in 12 other states, ultimately exposing what federal prosecutors called the largest systematic murder conspiracy in American history. Mason returned to Portland State University to complete his art degree, channeling his experiences into a senior exhibition that drew national attention. His sculptures and paintings exploring themes of family betrayal, institutional corruption, and survival became the centerpiece of a traveling exhibition that raised awareness about elder abuse and insurance fraud. 2 years after the arrests, Audrey stood in a gallery in downtown Portland, watching Mason speak to reporters about his latest work, a series called The Hidden Truth, that used mixed media to represent the experience of being poisoned by people you trust. Art has always been about revealing truths that people don't want to see, but I never expected my own family to provide such dark material, Mason told the assembled crowd. A journalist asked about the long-term impact of discovering their family's crimes, and Mason's response demonstrated the wisdom he'd gained from surviving their assassination attempt. "The hardest part wasn't learning that my parents were killers," he said thoughtfully. "It was learning that everything I thought I knew about my life was built on lies. My education, my opportunities, even my art supplies, all funded by blood money from people they murdered." "How do you live with that knowledge?" the reporter pressed. "By making sure their victims didn't die for nothing," Mason replied, gesturing toward his exhibition. "Every piece in this collection represents someone whose death helped fund my life. The least I can do is use that life to make sure their stories are told and their killers are held accountable." Audrey watched her brother field questions with poise and strength that would have been impossible during his darkest days in the hospital. The trauma of their experience had changed them both, but it had also revealed reserves of resilience neither had known they possessed. As the gallery event concluded, Mason joined Audrey on the sidewalk outside, both siblings looking up at the clear Oregon sky that seemed to promise better days ahead. "Do you ever regret exposing them?" Audrey asked. "They were our family, even if they were also murderers." Mason considered the question seriously before responding. "I regret that they made choices that forced us to choose between protecting them and protecting their future victims, but I don't regret stopping them. Every person who is still alive because we exposed the network makes everything we went through worthwhile." Standing there with her brother, both of them survivors,
both of them committed to ensuring that no other family would experience what they had endured, Audrey realized that they had succeeded in creating something their parents never could have imagined. They'd created a family built on truth instead of lies, on protection instead of exploitation, on love instead of profit. And that family, forged in the crucible of betrayal and strengthened by their commitment to justice, would endure long after the memory of Robert and Patricia Green's crimes faded into history. The hidden truth had finally been revealed, and the healing could begin.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.